Yeah, I didn't catch that.
We'll do it live. We need to start using it as our intro.
Right. All right. Hopefully we are live. You are listening to episode 26 of ACAB Radio. We are presented to you by Food Not Bombs Las Vegas. That's foodnotbombslasvegas.org and Nevada Cop Block, nvcopblock.org. We're your hosts. Well, it's backwards here. King Ron, Jay Lifer, Kelly Special K Patterson, and we have a very special guest for you guys today, journalist Whitney Webb. Hello, Whitney.
Hi.
There we go.
Show.
Whitney is a journalist with Mint Press News. That's where I find most of your work. But she's written for, why don't you tell everybody where you've written, who you've written for, and where you've been featured. And
Okay. Well, before Mint Press, I wrote at a page that's not really around anymore called True Activist, and I've also written for Ben Swann's Truth in Media. I've been a lot of my work on those three pages have been republished on a lot of alt media websites like Zero Hedge, 21st Century Wire, Global Research. I go on the radio a lot, mostly talk radio, not video interviews, on Radio Sputnik, and I've been on RT before.
Nice.
Impressive.
And that's it, really. Yeah.
Good stuff. I'm just going to share this out real quick. There we go. Yeah, thank you for being on. I'm a huge fan of your work. Been following you for a while now. There's not many people that, write on Yemen or Syria or, these neocons that are on the rise. So that's why I like to turn into your work in Mint Press News.
That are everywhere right now? Right, thanks.
Yep. So, we're going to talk about a few of your most recent articles as much as we can while we have you. The first I wanted to talk about was your Troika of Tyranny, your article on John Bolton. You were saying you wrote like a 3-part series on John Bolton, so I'm sure you could talk a lot about him.
Actually, it was actually 4, yeah. It was back when he was first announced as National Security Advisor, and it had sort of been teased that he was going to come into that position a few months before, but there was also some other potential candidates, and I was really hoping it wasn't going to be John Bolton because he's so awful, but then it was him. So I tried to write as much as I could, sort of inform people about why he's dangerous, mainly because, he's one of the, in my opinion, one of the most dangerous neoconservative Washington politics right now. So I basically each focusing on a different geopolitical area where Bolton basically wants war, including his ties to Israel, how he wants to go after Iran, how he wants to divide Syria and Iraq into a separate country, how he wants to go over Latin America, which is what my more recent article is about, and also some of his rhetoric about North Korea in recent years. So those were the different parts of that previous series. But this more recent article about Latin America has to do with the fact that not that long ago, I think less than a week ago, John Bolton delivered a speech in Miami to an audience of hardline opposition figures from Venezuela and Cuba, I believe. Miami is sort of like a base for people like that in a sense, and he basically gave his version of the axis of evil from the Bush era, and he calls it the Troika of Tyranny. And these are the 3 left-wing governments in Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And basically what he said there is that the U.S., the Trump administration is taking, quote, direct action against these countries right now, accused them of, sort of brought up all this Cold War rhetoric, like they're fostering communism and all this stuff in the region. And he also announced sanctions against Venezuela's gold sector. And some people that have advocated for the overthrow of Venezuela say that this is a precedent so they can sanction Venezuela's oil sector next, which is a big deal because that's a big moneymaker for the Venezuelan government. And also Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. They're even bigger than Saudi Arabia's.
So you're down there.
Bolton's rhetoric is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So this must really hit home for you as well, because you're down there in South America. I mean, this is the rise of the right is happening right there on your doorsteps. You've got, as you mentioned in your article, right-wing President Ivan, I don't know, Duque in Colombia, and then you've got
Duque, right.
Manuel Santos also on the right. The conservative billionaire Sebastián Piñera, president of Chile, and his cabinet's just...
he's the guy that followed him. Manuel Santos was the...
Uh-oh, hope we didn't lose you. You were cutting out there, but Colombia. I think you're back.
There we go.
You were cutting out a little bit there again, if you want to repeat that.
Am I?
Yep.
Yeah, we got you.
Sort of.
We don't and we do.
Good.
There we go.
Okay, sorry.
That's
anyway,
if you could repeat like every third
Duque
word.
is the president of Colombia right now, so that's the... Oh, am I out again?
No, you're good.
No, you're good. I lied.
I'm good? Okay, so as you were saying, Colombia is currently a right-wing government. Chile is also a right-wing government where I live. And as most of us, I think, know now, Brazil also has a new president-elect who is super right-wing, arguably more right-wing than any other president.
Yeah.
And that's a real swing.
The guy in Honduras,
right?
whose name is eluding me at the moment.
But that's a real swing politically, because not too long ago, not only were the governments in South America predominantly left-wing, but they were actually socialist, right? So is that something that, like, there's visible interference from the United States that's caused that?
All that well.
So, yeah, you brought up Brazil. That's your next article that I wanted to get into. Bolsonaro being elected in Brazil, and just how tight he is with Israel. Israeli Prime Minister set to attend inauguration of Brazil's Bolsonaro, highlighting Likud's support for ethno-nationalist politicians abroad. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. I pulled up a couple quotes from the article.
Sure. Basically, sure. Okay.
Over the course of his controversial...
Bolsonaro... Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry, there's like a lag here.
I know.
I'm having
I'm just going to read this quote
time.
real quick. It says, over the course of his controversial campaign, Bolsonaro's lavished praise upon Israel on numerous occasions, making it no secret that he's a great admirer of Israel's current ruling party. Netanyahu loves him back. You know, it's just a love relationship. He's talking about being
very right wing. Yeah.
Yeah, he's talking about being the very first prime minister to go to Brazil and congratulate him. Bolsonaro also announced that he wanted to close the Palestinian embassy in Brazil and cut off relations with Palestine completely, and move the Brazilian embassy to Tel Aviv, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Like, does this sound familiar?
US,
like, that's the same thing that the U.S. did, right?
Well, this is part of Israel's big push right now to sort of try and get as many governments as possible to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, because the UN actually recently warned, and people that follow the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have sort of looked at this for a long time, that Israel is moving to try and annex the entire West Bank of Palestine, and in order to do that, they sort of need this legitimacy around Jerusalem being their capital, even though Tel Aviv is the internationally recognized capital of Israel. They want it to be Jerusalem. And so in the case of the U.S., that the U.S. Embassy was moved to Jerusalem had to do with the fact that Trump's biggest donor is Sheldon Adelson, who basically, it's come out, lobbied for that so extensively. And now he's actually the biggest donor in all of U.S. politics. So he's really just been pumping all this money in basically to try and get policies like this pushed through. The withdrawal from the Iran deal was also a big push of his, as was actually putting John Bolton into the administration. He's really John Bolton too. But anyway, so Bolsonaro is just, another one of these politicians that Netanyahu is openly supporting, even though actually even Israeli newspapers compared Bolsonaro to Hitler on several occasions.
Right.
So some people were kind of surprised, how could Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, openly support someone who's being compared to Hitler in Israeli media. And, this really has to do with the fact that a lot of people that, you know, nominally are anti-Semitic, like even like white nationalists in the U.S., like Richard Spencer, they love Israel because Israel is an ethno-state, or at least the, you know, Netanyahu and the ruling party of Israel. I mean, that's what they want to. That's what they want Israel to be, an ethnic state that's exclusively for Jewish people of a certain ethnicity. Because I mean, if you look into what Israel does in a racial sense, you know, they discriminate against Israeli Jews that aren't white on a regular basis.
Yeah, they were talking
so basically,
about...
you have people that are also like, you know, ethno-nationalists, like Bolsonaro, Richard Spencer, people like that, you know, having this commonality and this ideological similarity with Israel, which is why you see Netanyahu supporting that, because the more leaders, the more legitimacy Israel's current government has in that ethno-state project it's currently trying to bring about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely another correlation I wanted to point out between Bolsonaro and Trump. Just when he was running, he was talking about how he's going to drain the swamp, right? He's the swamp drainer. But
right.
More hypocrisy is, you know, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife are up for corruption scandal investigation, right?
Do you
like tons of corruption scandals, yeah. I think even his son got wrapped up in that too. So, you know, they're a few months ago, their popularity as a political family got really slammed in Israel because of all the corruption, but it's sort of come back after, like, you know, he really pushed like the Iranian threat and all this stuff in his UN speech that he did recently. But anyway, Bolsonaro's claim to drain the swamp is also really hypocritical, because the guy's been in Brazil's super nasty, insanely corrupt Congress for like 30 years, and he only got interested in draining the swamp when, you know, Dilma Rousseff and the Workers' Party and that, you know, the left-wing party that was in power, when they got slammed with corruption stuff, that's when he was like, oh yeah, drain the swamp, because he doesn't like those people. So he's drain the swamp when it's convenient, politically convenient for me, you know. So I just find that claim to be really hypocritical.
Sure.
You know, and he's also going to be bringing, you know, his economic platform is like complete neoliberalization and crony capitalism. So I don't really see that being an antidote to Brazilian corruption either. So I just find that claim really hypocritical.
Absolutely.
Just like it is for Trump. So.
I mean, do you see other states falling, you know, like a domino effect now with this, you know, right wing? It seems like a wave that's going through Central and South America. I mean, do you see it continuing?
Well, I mean, so Bolton basically went after the three, you know, countries that are still like left-wing in Latin America, well, with the exception being Ecuador. Ecuador's an interesting case because it was sort of one of these like left-wing countries, and the guy that's currently president, Lenin Moreno, he claimed to be left-wing, but he's really, you know, come back to the U.S. fold and has basically done whatever the U.S. has asked of him. Beyond the only left-wing country that wasn't named by Bolton in this new axis of evil, though, was Bolivia, which I think is interesting because Evo Morales is also, you know, left-wing in that sense. But I think the U.S. is really trying to push things to the right here in Latin America as much as they can. And, you know, the U.S. has a really nasty history of coup d'etats and all that sort of stuff here in Latin America. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. One of the most recent ones was the most recent military coup was in 2009 in Brazil, but you've had more what have been called sort of like soft power coups, where it's sort of like parliamentary coups, like how Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, was sort of forced out. And that also happened in another country. Paraguay was the other one where that happened as well. And those were just in the past, I think, 5 years or so. So I think, you know, going to keep using those tactics as much as they can to try and depose these other leftist governments that, you know, they don't want around. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Mexico, because Mexico recently elected a left-wing president, and you know, that's like right on the U.S. border. So if they're concerned about countries as far away as Paraguay, they're probably going to be worried about Mexico as well, especially because the president-elect of Mexico, he announced that he wants to nationalize Mexico's oil resources, which in the past is basically a recipe for asking the U.S. to invade you. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, it's a troubling trend. And basically, just another example. There's tons of examples about how the U.S. does not give a crap about spreading democracy and freedom around the world. They prefer to work with authoritarian regimes that, basically act like U.S. colonies and, fulfill U.S. the economic interests of corporate America.
That they do.
Absolutely. I think we could talk forever about U.S. coups just because there's been so many, but
many.
Yeah. But yet Iran and, Russia are the real threats to democracy, not us who are going in and having coups and overthrowing democratically elected presidents. Yeah, it's not the U.S. But I did want to talk a little bit about the coup in Brazil, just because Bolsonaro was such a fan of the military dictator that was installed down there. He's quoted as saying that he wished, the dictator who's infamous for blackbagging people and just killing his opposition, he wishes that the dictator would have killed 30,000 more people, So people compare Bolsonaro to Trump, but he's way worse. Way worse. And
I'm glad you bring that up because it was a huge for me of people comparing Bolsonaro to Trump, just like, oh, he's the tropical Trump and all this stuff, which is like, Bolsonaro is so much more extreme than Trump. I just feel like it just does us all a disservice to make that, superficial comparison. Because if you think about it, Trump is more focused on external threats like the trade war with China, legal immigration, Iran, things like that. But Bolsonaro is more focused on Brazil's quote unquote internal enemies, meaning like, their indigenous population, left-wing people, people of African descent, Afro-Brazilians, and he openly campaigned on creating a police state to go after these internal enemies, which is something Trump did not, one could argue that Trump is sort of following that same agenda, but he didn't openly campaign on it, like Bolsonaro, which I think is an important difference. So in that sense, Trump is out, but Bolsonaro openly called for shooting 30,000 on the street.
Yeah.
Empowering the police and military to do that, which is, it's also worth pointing out that Brazil is the only country where more people of African descent are more likely to be shot by police than the U.S. It's just going to create. I think Bolsonaro is much more threatening in that sense than Trump.
Yeah, and since he took office, I saw that the workers movement, anybody affiliated with the workers movement, he wants to label them as terrorists. Like, that's crazy.
Well, he wants to imprison them or he wants to send them into exile, which obviously is not good for democracy.
No, that's fascism.
But I haven't heard anyone in the U.S. that talks about, in the U.S. government complain about that so far. Actually, in the Bolton speech that I mentioned earlier, he praised Bolsonaro. He was like, oh, yes, we have a new like-minded power.
That's very
telling. So that tells you all you need to know about John Bolton, I guess.
And U.S. policy.
I think that's the thing about the people in the United States is they aspire to be that, but they just don't have the ability yet. That's what it is.
Well, like I said,
Right. Well, they still like to they do in sort of this humanitarian veneer, but I think it's starting to fall apart just because it gets so severe. Like especially if you look at how they defend the conflict in Yemen, for example, and they claim to care about human rights and civilian casualties and all that stuff when so many people there, like millions of people, are either facing starvation and tens of thousands of people have been killed by U.S. made bombs in the Saudi-led coalition. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Spreading democracy, spreading freedom. I mean, it's really hard to make that argument. So I think that we're going to see in the not future, those humanitarian democracy promoting excuses sort of fall away, and
the true face come out.
A more troubling era. I think that was the phrase I was looking for.
Yeah, it's just so see-through now. I mean, for me at least, I think for most people. But definitely check out this article, guys. Go to MintPress News. You can actually search on mintpressnews.com. Search Whitney Webb, and all her articles will come up. But this article really has some great links throughout it that you can click that'll take you to other articles. She gets into the economic implications of Bolsonaro being elected, like the impact on the meat industry, and also talks about the ethno-nationalists, like in Israel, translating into apartheid policies. So definitely a good article. But I do want to transition into this next article, your border article, where Trump's basically issuing new rules of engagement that are pretty much like the IDF in Gaza, where if you throw rocks, let's treat them as rifles, right? And basically giving them carte blanche to open fire on anybody who throws a rock. So I don't know if you want to talk about
right.
this
So
article.
this article, sure. I will gladly talk about it. I do need to point out, though, that just today Trump tried to distance himself from those comments. He just said he didn't want people to throw rocks and migrants to throw rocks, and he would try and do everything to stop it, but he didn't want people getting killed or something. I think he just got backlash. But I think, it was really interesting when he made that statement because, what he said is that, anyone in this migrant caravan that throws stones or rocks at, the U.S. troops on the border, I told them consider it a rifle, like they're firing a rifle. Mm-hmm. And there was all this outrage from people on CNN and stuff like that about how it would be like a war crime and all this stuff. But those same people, it's not really common for them to talk about what, the IDF, the Israeli does in Gaza, where, on the border protests there that have been going on since March, the Great Return March, they've shot over 22,000 people. They've killed, and none of those people were armed. The only weapons that they had were rocks. Mm-hmm. So in Israel, it's perfectly acceptable within the Israeli government. Rules of engagement are totally okay. But, when Trump orders it, apparently it's not. So there's sort of, this double standard between what is okay for Israel and what's okay for the U.S. Yeah. But in terms of what's going on with the troop deployment, there are some other things that aren't mentioned in my article that I think are worth talking about. One thing is that the amount of troops that have been deployed to the border are significant. It's supposed to be 5,200, but could go up to 15,000. And 5,200 is how many troops are officially stationed in Iraq right now, which I think is kind of a significant thing to point out.
Absolutely.
It's also significant that in the past, Trump has deployed the National Guard in these cases, or whenever there's been sort of like any sort of domestic crisis, that the precedent has been to deploy the National Guard, not active duty troops. Yep. But right. What Trump has done here is deploy active duty troops, which I think is really significant because if there is any future domestic crisis, whether it's on the border or anywhere else within he can now, use this precedent to send active duty U.S. soldiers anywhere he wants in the country, which I think is dangerous.
That's what
Another thing to point out is that, the National Guard troops that he deployed in April earlier this year are still there. They were never undeployed. So I think there's also the potential there's the possibility that these 5,000 troops could stay there indefinitely as well, and we'll have an extremely militarized, southern border, which I think is something worth pointing out there as well.
Well, one thing I'd like to mention is that there's also right-wing militia going down by the hundreds. So when Trump made that statement about treating, stone throwers as using rifles, he might not be able to hold the troops to that, and he might walk back. But these militias heard that and will follow. Mm-hmm. And you can see how then they can be turned internally against protesters who disagree with policies, since he's setting them up. It's, it's very troubling on that respect. The military is pretty troubling, but they have a code of conduct. These militia do not. So for the people that listen to our show, through a podcast player and just getting the audio, they can't see these quotes or your article that we're pulling up in the video. So I just want to read this real quick because I thought you made a great point. Like, if it does get ugly at the border, there's going to be broader consequences that people need to think about. Like what you said, how you closed out the article, that this greenlights the U.S. military to function as an IDF-style military police force whenever the next threat emerges, whether it be foreign invaders or internal enemies, right? And there's a couple other points that these types of orders,
like first, it will further legitimize Israel's brutal repression of protests. Second, it allows U.S. soldiers to shoot at unarmed civilians, which sets a dangerous precedent for future domestic unrest. And third, in Gaza, many desperate and helpless people are likely to die should they open fire. You know what I mean? So it's just some good points that you pointed out in the article.
I think that's one of those things also this is a concerted effort to create that precedent. It's not, they're using the caravan as an excuse to put the military there, but the purpose is for those future efforts when they want to use the military for different things. And, you have the posse comitas restrictions.
That's exactly what I think. I'm glad you stated that,
eliminate that
so directly.
And it's also,
that's exactly what I think.
And it's also
because the migrant caravan, these are all asylum seekers. You have to be physically present in the U.S. to request asylum. So, I mean, these aren't the invaders they've been made out to be. And the last time there was a migrant caravan in April, the number that was originally stated that Trump fearmongered about, the amount that actually came to the border was like way smaller. And even the Pentagon has admitted they don't really consider the migrant caravan to be a threat. They're actually more worried about the right-wing militias.
And they should be.
So I think this is sort of, a manufactured excuse to try and bring, sort of the line between the military and the police, which is a precursor to a police state, and really, brings up the potential for the U.S. here, the U.S. government here, to violate posse comitatus, which would, is supposed to prevent the military from doing domestic policing duty. And having them on the border, active duty soldiers on the border, really has the potential to really blur the line of what's legal and what's not legal.
Yeah, and what about habeas corpus
in
as
the
well?
Context of, it's dangerous.
Yeah, and
I think it's really dangerous, and I think people need to pay attention, not so much here, but the precedent this is going to set for future crises. Like, what happens if there's like a big economic recession or a depression in the future, and there's unrest over that? Trump can now respond by sending active duty troops onto your streets. That is really dangerous, and people should be really concerned about these precedents, not just the migrant caravan or all this stuff. I think that should be the focus of people, but it's not. But it should be.
Yeah, and they're already ramping up all the propaganda. Like, they had when they came in through Mexico, and they were distributing the pictures of supposedly injured cops from the caravan, and it was cops from a riot in 2012 that had nothing to do with the caravan.
Yeah,
a lot of propaganda.
And it's not a coincidence that we're following in the steps of IDF, because we have police right now being sent to Israel, and we have Israeli police and military coming here to train our police.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that was another great article that I'm glad we got to talk about. Briefly, I wanted to get into the next one about Pamela Bennett's hunger strike, which I saw she made it like almost a month, and then actually passed the torch to Cindy.
Yeah, I think it was
Sheehan.
26 days. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty impressive. And so if you want to talk about maybe why she's doing this, and I got a couple quotes from your article as well. Pamela Bennett, an American woman living in San Francisco. Sorry.
There we go.
Pamela did her hunger strike for 26 days, and then to Cindy Sheehan, who is a really well-known anti-war activist in the U.S. A lot of people might remember her back from the Iraq War. Pamela told me when I interviewed her that her main reason for doing the hunger strike had to do with the media blackout in the U.S. about the war in Yemen. Just because so many people that she had talked to in her daily life and on the internet that lived in the U.S., just had no idea what was really going on in Yemen, and even she, before she investigated, had thought that the famine in Yemen was something that just was the result of natural circumstances, like a natural disaster, like a drought or something. She didn't realize that it was the result of, the Saudi and UAE coalition that's supported by the U.S. and the UK that have caused this famine, where by the end of the year, an estimated 18 million people are going to be on the brink of starvation, which is an insane number. And it also includes over 5 million children who are starving to death. And the fact that the media, the U.S. media just has not covered this the way they should, is really obnoxious. It's only really been recently, ever since Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia got into trouble with the mainstream media because of the murder of Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist. The New York Times published, one story about the famine, and it was interesting because on MSNBC, there was an MSNBC anchor, and she said, "Well, wait for the world to pay attention." But, her program and her whole network didn't cover that conflict at all. Last year. Actually, they did 0 segments on Yemen and over 400 on Stormy Daniels.
Right.
So I think that's a really
telling
good example of how hypocritical the mainstream media has been when it comes to Yemen. And so, Pamela Bennett was really, took really radical and inspiring, in my opinion, steps to try and bring as much attention as she could to what's going on in Yemen. And it's really to her credit that she made such a personal sacrifice to do that. But, 26 days is a really long time to go without food. And, there were other people in her group that also were doing fasts, and none of them, a lot of them had to stop. Some of them were even hospitalized as a result, which is, it shows you the extent to which these people were willing to go to raise awareness about this conflict.
Absolutely.
So, Pamela also said that the reason she only stopped because people from Yemen on the internet begged her to start eating food. So, that's really, I think her efforts should be applauded, and I think that she's brought a lot of attention to this conflict in Yemen.
Definitely.
And for anyone that's interested, Pamela Bennett publishes a lot of stuff on Facebook. She has a page called Yemen Rising, and you can also contact her on her personal Facebook page. But if you want to get involved in the hunger strike or any sort of solidarity efforts that are related to that Yemen Rising group, you can either contact Pamela or you can contact Cindy Sheehan. They're both mostly on Facebook, though I believe that Pamela is also on Twitter, but more active on Facebook, both of them.
I think
for those that are interested.
I think it's such a great idea. I mean, sure, somebody going on a hunger strike alone isn't going to stop a war in Yemen, right? But if this grows like wildfire, like say like the Ice Bucket Challenge or something, like start off with Pamela Bennett, big names like Cindy Sheehan doing it, and then when she goes, as long as she can, pass it on to somebody else, just until people start hearing about it, and then everyday people start doing it, and then your parents, you're like, hey, come on over for dinner. All right, yeah, I'll come, but I'm not eating. I'm on a hunger strike. And that's how it enters into the home, and it just spreads like wildfire, and then you can like tag people in it.
I think that's a good point, because of social media censorship right now, if you talk to people in your daily life, like you mentioned, like at the dinner table or stuff like that about Yemen, that's the best way to get the word out, because, pages like Facebook and Twitter and all of that are ramping down on this sort of information. Actually, the New York Times article that I mentioned that was recent, that had a picture of one of the starving girl in Yemen, Facebook actually blocked that, and they blocked the link to the New York Times article.
Unbelievable.
New York Times, they still blocked it. It wasn't an alt media page, So I think it's really important that, when it comes to big issues like this, if we want to raise awareness in the United States, you have to talk to people outside of the virtual world, and just, in your daily life, be like, did you know other people are about to die in Yemen? I mean, that's a pretty shocking figure, and I think it's important that people take more direct action in that sense. I mean, a hunger strike isn't for everyone, but it may be for some people. But people that don't want to, that aren't able to participate in a hunger strike, I mean, there's a lot you could do. I did an interview last week where I talked about, there's some other organizing, movements that aren't hard to build, that people could, pop up, try to bring about in order to raise awareness about Yemen. And the example I brought up is creating, like a BDS movement, but instead of targeting Israel, targeting Syria Emirates over Yemen.
Yeah.
Because, these people are the people leading this war are really sick individuals. The fact that they're willing to starve so many children and innocent people to death to try and, take over the country and install a puppet government should tell you that these people don't think like you and me. They're not like normal people that have like morals. So the only way to really hit them hard and make them reconsider what they're doing in Yemen is economically. And, if you look at how BDS has so totally unnerved the Israeli government, I think, a similar movement would be really effective in going after, the coalition that's waging war in Yemen.
Absolutely.
So that could be another option for people that aren't interested in hunger striking.
Also, since today's the day of voting, there are some bills in the House and the Senate that Pamela wanted to bring awareness to. Contact your representatives. I don't see that personally as an effective method, but for those of you that still believe in the political system, Sanders has got the JR 54 bill, Cons has HR 138, and McGovern JR 102, and it's basically to withdraw from Yemen, end the U.S.'s role in Yemen, or restrict arms sales to Yemen. So she urged everyone on her page to put pressure on your representatives. Like you said, the crazy people we're dealing with, there's Lockheed Martin's CEO, Marilyn Houston, who recently attacked Code Pink because Code Pink's going office to office, to various senators and representatives and trying to get them to vote for these bills so that we can end this conflict in Yemen. I know Rand Paul was another vocal politician speaking on Yemen.
Right.
But yeah, she sent out an email, the CEO of Lockheed Martin sent out an email to over 200,000 people talking about how Code Pink's bad for business, and
Right.
it's just crazy because
That's because they protest. They're out there on the streets.
Oh, absolutely.
I love Code Pink, so.
Yeah, they do great work.
Well, they're bad for the business of war.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just crazy because it was Lockheed Martin's bomb that killed the 44 school children in that one attack in Yemen. So Americans don't realize that it's our bombs, it's our planes that are doing reconnaissance for these strikes. Yeah, it's our policy.
Listen, it's our allies.
We're also, I'd also like to point out that we are, since June of this year, the U.S. military has been the one fine-tuning the target list for the Saudi coalition. So the U.S. military is also picking the targets of those that are being bombed. Yeah. And that, of course, was 2 months before the school bus was bombed. So the U.S. military was involved in that beyond just the Lockheed Martin bomb itself. And all of the other subsequent places that have been civilian sites that have been bombed. I think last week they bombed another market. I mean, they just bombed everything. It's basically, what the U.S. did during the Korean War in North Korea, just bomb anything that moves.
Yep.
And that's pretty much the Saudi strategy there. But also it's come out that they're going after, water infrastructure in Yemen because they want the cholera crisis, which is supposed to be the worst cholera crisis in history. Cholera is a preventable disease, but because of the blockade, medicine can't get in. But it's largely spread by unclean water, so they're going after the water, hoping that epidemic will get worse.
And biological war.
Well, of course, claims even more lives in this starvation. And because of the blockade on medicine, you have 66,000 children dying a year from preventable diseases in Yemen, on top of people starving to death, and on top of the people being bombed. So this is just mass murder on an insane scale. And I think it's really important for anyone that values life to try to get involved in raising awareness about Yemen to some extent, whether supporting Pamela Bennett or Cindy Sheehan efforts, or doing something on your own, or just sharing articles about Yemen, and so we can raise awareness. I think it's really important because if nothing changes, we're going to see potentially 2/3 of an entire country just be wiped out, with U.S. and U.K. support by the Saudi Emiratis. And I personally don't want that to happen, and I don't think any normal person does either. So I think it's really important that people try and raise awareness about Yemen however they can.
Absolutely. Share MintPress News' articles on Facebook while you still can, while they're still there. While Facebook still
while
allows
we're still around.
Yeah.
We'll see how long. We'll see how long that is. Hopefully,
that kind of brings us
longer
into,
than I personally expect. So.
Yeah, I'm surprised you guys are still up, especially given the Facebook
Me
purge.
too. Thank goodness, though.
Yeah,
right.
Thank God.
Yeah, we were lucky to not get swept up in that because actually Anti-Media, one of the pages that was deleted, they shared a lot of MintPress News article. We shared a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
So we're really lucky we didn't get swept up in that. We're not really sure what saved us, but we're pretty sure that if there's another purge, we'll be next. Part of that is because recently.
That might have been it.
If you've talked about Bellingcat on your show before, but Bellingcat, Elliot Higgins, I've written in the past month 2 articles that have been really critical of him, and he got mad about one on Twitter. But anyway, one of the censors on Facebook is the Atlantic Council, and Elliot Higgins works with them. So I hope we might have dug ourselves a hole there, but hopefully, we'll still be around. And I'm really hoping that there will be some sort of workaround to social media censorship at some point. Of course, the best way to get, news from the sites you enjoy reading is to sign up for their newsletter. Almost all alt media pages have newsletters you can sign up for, where you can get all of our content delivered to your email, which is completely outside of social media. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, there's, alternative, as we saw with what happened recently with Gab, which is that Twitter alternative. These censorship efforts are actually willing to basically pull these separate, social media pages out by the roots by attacking the structure on the internet they're hosting their servers to keep them offline, which I think is a really disturbing precedent. Because it's not just trying to cut people out of your Facebook newsfeed, it's trying to, silencing people to the point of keeping them off the internet completely. Hopefully that doesn't continue, but I think we're going to see more of this. Actually, there was an article written by Max Blumenthal recently about how some big neocon insider, Jamie Fly, said that the last purge in early October was just the beginning, and that was almost a month ago. So I'm sure, most likely after midterms, we might see more of this. Hopefully not, obviously, because I would like Mint Press to continue having a page, but I urge everyone that's interested in alternative media in general to look up as many, make a list of your favorite pages, sign up for their newsletters, or sign up for, alternative social media sites that are still online, and do your best to try and fight against the censorship, because we all have to resist it.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they just want us to, tell us what to think, which, if you're a critical thinking American,
you're in a minority.
Support that. Right, that's true, but there's still some of us. So,
yeah, you're a dying breed.
Yeah. Just thank you so much for what you do. It's a scary time now. I never expected to live in an era like this. It's shocking. So hopefully we'll all be around.
Yeah.
Tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. But I question that.
Yeah. So you wrote a great article about the Facebook purge.
Well,
we talked about it.
The lag again.
Yeah. We talked about it on our last show, so I'm not going to get too into it. But yeah, go over to Mint Press, check out that article. She wrote a good article about Gab, which she was just talking about, which was a whole another level of escalation in the censorship. Because it's not just a Facebook page. This is a whole social media platform that was wiped from the internet, right? So it's getting worse and worse. Great articles, check them out. You got 2 more articles I have on here that I wanted to talk about, but we're running out of time. But definitely check this out. It's about the military-industrial complex, a lawsuit against a military contractor, DynCorp, accused of enslaving American employees in Kuwaiti tent cities.
No.
So these were translators that basically their passports were taken away from them, right? So, and the company told the translators that it's so that they could get a work visa, but then they didn't get them a work visa, they got them a tourist visa. So these people who were put up in these tent cities couldn't even leave the tent cities, because if they did, they'd be arrested. And yeah, it was a really cool article.
Which is a pretty common tactic.
And these translators, worth pointing out, are American citizens. And this is actually the second lawsuit to be made public this year, accusing a prominent military contractor of enslaving American citizen workers in Kuwait, which is because this took place and the previous case that came out in April also took place in Kuwait. So if you sign up to work for a military contractor and they tell you you're going to Kuwait, you might want to check before going, or at least have a backup passport. Well, I don't even know if you can do that, but don't give them your passport.
Give some Americans a little
it's really
taste.
troubling stuff. Also, DynCorp, though, is one of the most notorious, in my opinion, of all U.S. military contractors, because since the 90s, they've been super involved in all these sex trafficking scandals. Back in the NATO invasion and intervention in Bosnia and the Balkans, they were buying and selling young girls as young as 12 for sex slaves. And they've never really stopped. I mean, they did it in Colombia too. They sexually assaulted underage girls in Colombia, and I think they're actually the biggest military contractor. But back in 2009, company employees of DynCorp gave Afghan police drugs and mailed children prostitutes who danced for them and all this stuff. But they, even all these scandals were confirmed and came out. They keep getting lucrative U.S. military contracts. Like apparently the Pentagon is okay with this sort of behavior. Really makes you wonder what's going on.
It's almost like
with all these other military contractors, not just DynCorp.
It's almost like their customers are the ones making out those contracts.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Right.
And your last article here is about white phosphorus attacks in Syria, which is a war crime, and this isn't the first time that this has happened. I don't know if you want to talk about that. This was the one that was just released today. U.S. uses banned white phosphorus bombs in Syrian city for the 4th time in 2 months. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Right. So, So just since September 10th, in most recently taking place on this past Saturday, the U.S. has used white phosphorus bombs on the same city 4 times in less than 2 months, which is a big deal considering that this weapon is technically banned internationally. The U.S. has tried to get around the international ban by saying they use it as smoke screens and all this stuff, but you're not allowed to use it in areas that are heavily populated with civilians, like the city is that they bombed 4 times in 2 months. But the U.S. coalition in Syria and Iraq has been using white phosphorus pretty much the whole time. Back when they were doing last year fighting ISIS in Mosul and in Raqqa, they use tons of white phosphorus there, and those are really heavily populated cities. And another thing that hasn't been reported often about Raqqa and Mosul is that the death toll is higher than was reported. I think the figures that have been officially put by watchdogs for Raqqa at least have been at least 4,000 dead, but that's not even right, in my opinion, because there's still all these reports of bodies still trapped under the rubble. Remember that Raqqa had 90% of all its buildings destroyed by the U.S., right? So, some people have estimated that there's as many as 6,000 bodies still under the rubble. I mean, that's insane. And doesn't get that much coverage at all. And the U.S. sort of hypocritically says, like, there were the Russia in Syria and there was like 5 people that died or something, but then they have like 6,000 of bodies a year later still rotting in the city they bombed and turned into like the surface of the moon. I mean, it's really hypocritical, and there's a reason the U.S. doesn't talk about Raqqa anymore. There's a reason there's not a lot of coverage of that, and it's also interesting that this city that's been many times with white phosphorus, Hajin, it hasn't gotten much coverage at all. The new offensive that they've launched in this area. I mean, 4 times in 2 months with internationally banned chemical weapons, and there's no outrage at all. I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah, it's just insane. And of course, the U.S. military doesn't acknowledge all these the high civilian death toll, just in complete denial. So we're getting short on time here. I just want to thank you for coming on the show. Keep up the good work. What's the best way for people listening to the show to see your work and, follow you on Twitter or Facebook?
Well, I use Twitter and I use Facebook, but I don't use them that extensively because, I try to unplug every once in a while, and I spend a lot of time writing. So I don't really have that much time for social media outside of work, really. I try and spend more time with my family. But if you wanna follow my work, right now, all of my stuff is being published at Mint Press. It's the only site I'm currently writing for. So if you go to either my author page at Mint Press or you sign up for Mint Press's newsletter, you can get all my stuff that way. But I also I have an author page on Facebook. I regularly post, and to a lesser extent on Twitter. I usually just tweets out because I don't use it as often. But you can find my work that way. I probably should be better connected like most other journalists, but I'm not. So please visit Mint Press and you can find my work there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm signed up for your guys' newsletter. I encourage everybody watching, listening to definitely go to mintpressnews.com and sign up for the newsletter. It takes 2 seconds, and they don't bombard you with, spam or anything like that. It's just a few articles here and there. They'll send you some links, and it just makes it really easy when you're checking your email. You see a headline that, interests you, click it. It's that simple. And that way you cut out the middleman. You cut out Facebook. There's no censorship. So, yeah, definitely encourage everybody to do that. Whitney Webb, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Don't tune out yet. We've still got some local stories to talk about here in Las Vegas. There was an officer-involved shooting, controversial officer-involved shooting, where an unarmed man, well, I guess he was armed with a plastic
Toy.
stick. Yeah, toy sword.
Well, part of that, though, the person who called that in had said he was carrying what looked like a large tool.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't reported as being a weapon. And so realistically, the cops shouldn't even respond to that.
Right.
And on top of that, you're allowed to own a machete. You're actually allowed to own a real machete.
And you can
Right.
walk around with it.
Right. So he wasn't doing anything illegal.
No.
Regardless, nobody had reported that he was doing anything illegal. So the whole response in the first place was unnecessary. Nothing should have happened at all.
Mm-hmm.
The cop should have said, well, what is he doing that's
Right.
illegal when that person called?
Yeah. Stop bothering us with, nonsense phone calls.
Absolutely. So there's some local coverage of this. Definitely not in the mainstream media, nationally anyways. So head on over to the Free Thought Project. They wrote an article on it. But we have the body cam footage, which we're going to play for you guys.
Officer involved is Officer Cameron Gunn. He is 29 years old and has been with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for 1 year.
A rookie.
1 year with the service, you see a lot.
The investigation revealed he fired 4 rounds.
The other officer fired 3, so it was 2 officers, 7 rounds
The
total.
suspect's weapon was a black 22-inch homemade plastic sword with black electrical tape over the handle, resembling a machete.
Not in my view. Looked like crushed plastic.
Drop it. What's in your hand? Put it on the ground. Put it on the ground.
First time I watched this, I just couldn't help but notice
Put it on the
just
ground
how
now.
chill the dude was. He was moving
You'll
at
hear
a
the sergeant
snail's
in the
pace.
background. He's also to the right of the vehicle, making contact with the suspect.
Put it down.
Like, how could you see him as a threat? He's chilling,
That's the
smoking a
sergeant.
cigarette. They got the helicopter, multiple
what-
units.
Fucking pigs, man.
Ocean 22, give me a red. Subject's not following command.
What the
Thing we're gonna have to shoot.
Yep.
Drop it. Drop it now.
Tase him. You know what I mean? There's a
The
beanbag.
officers say that the suspect's
Drop
not
it.
following command and that he's saying that we're going to have to shoot him.
Yep.
You have to.
We have to shoot. Well,
The fuck?
we have to get our numbers up. We haven't shot that many people this
Put
month.
it down.
Well, Well, they're ahead of last year.
They could always do better. See, we have to shoot them. We got to keep.
What you got, Sergeant? Whoa!
Whoa!
It's another vehicle pulling up, which gives us a crossfire. So
Nice.
he's now going to back out.
So they've got him boxed in. There's nowhere for him to go. He's isolated,
Suspect's
right?
also smoking a cigarette.
There's just no need for lethal
Well,
force.
they saved him from getting cancer.
Well, they
Put
did.
it on
He's
the
smoking
ground.
a cigarette. So they like, even if you want to say that's the same basic shape as a machete, like there's no blade there.
No.
Like you could see.
Don't see a
metal blade.
flash
So
or-
there's nothing.
It's all
like,
good, man.
There's no reason to
can
believe
talk.
he actually has a.
Light them up. You know what I mean?
Weapon
They
that's
have
ready to
lights. They
use.
could.
You can see both the sergeant and the officer trying to negotiate.
And that's the other thing. They have
Give him
spotlights
his
on the
license
car.
Mhm.
My God, when they're on the street, man, it blinds you when they pull people over. You know.
Weapon out to his side.
So. It's sickening watching.
Well, and he's holding it out right now, so you can pretty clearly see.
He's not moving. There's no.
No, he doesn't rush officers. He doesn't even advance quickly, make
I'll
any
show you
fast
the,
movements.
Sergeant's body-worn camera.
And this dude had mental issues. Like a buddy of
What's your
mine
hand?
Right.
lives in the neighborhood with him, knew the guy, knew that he had mental issues. Like he called
Put it
that
on the ground.
toy that he made his baby. You know what I mean? Like he
Put it on the ground.
wasn't all there. And instead of
Take
waiting
your
for
headphones out of your
crisis
ears.
intervention team or
Headphones.
Well, all
anything-
these guys are supposed to be fucking trained in crisis intervention trained. They don't. They
Yeah,
can
right.
call in extra people.
Take the
There's nothing
headphones out of
happening.
your ears.
What's the rush? What do they got to do all fucking day? They could stay here if it takes an hour, 2 hours
yeah.
to prevent the death of an innocent person.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who's is in distress or
Yeah, they didn't kill him because he was
Hey.
a threat. They killed
No.
him because he didn't follow orders.
right. This is
Comply
more,
or die.
right. This is more training for the American population to comply or die.
Exactly.
So you don't question, you
Dude,
don't
just
speak up
drop
for
it. It's not
yourself.
worth
You know,
it, man.
the consequences for any sort of, standing up for yourself is instant death now.
Drop it.
Is there a continue to ask him to drop it?
He's not listening to verbal commands. He's got headphones in his ears.
And I've only heard it in one language. Right?
5441 Tinker Toy.
Yeah, what if he doesn't
So-
speak English? Yeah.
Drop the knife, dude. It's not worth it, man.
Towards the end of this video, you'll hear the
Just
officers
drop it.
and the sergeant
We can talk
requesting
about this, bud.
less lethal options.
Dude, just drop it. It's not fucking worth it, man. You're not in any trouble. Just drop the weapon, and we'll talk, okay? Just
And the
drop
other
it, man.
thing-
Sit and
Drop
wait.
it, we'll talk.
The other thing is that Metro likes to claim that they're so transparent, right? Like, look, we released the body cam footage, but then they
drop it,
cut
man.
it
It's not
at
worth
the
it,
end.
bud.
Like, they only show the first shot. They fired 7 shots, but they don't want to show the people
Just
that because they
drop
don't
it,
want
man.
people to
Just
see
talk
how
to
brutal
us. It's
the
not
murder
worth
was,
it.
where they
He just raised
kept
it up
firing,
again.
kept firing. You know what I mean? And murdered this man.
Well,
Drop it.
they also didn't
What's
play
your
the
name,
beginning
man?
because
No.
there's a thing about where
What's
the
your name,
audio
bud?
doesn't start.
Yeah, it's highly edited.
Neither one of these body cams does it show
What's
the
your
beginning.
name?
So it doesn't
Mhm.
show the initial, contact with him and what kind of confrontation they initiated.
Yeah.
Get a unit with a
That would make
beanbag
him
shotgun.
reluctant to talk to them.
All right, so here he comes. He's gonna start walking around the car. Like, keep the vehicle in between you and him, and wait for backup,
That's
and
what
bring
I'm
him in
saying.
alive. You know.
Hey, drop it, drop it, drop it.
He's leaving.
Hey,
Look how slow he's moving. Watch
I'm gonna
this.
shoot you, motherfucker. I'm gonna shoot you. Stop it. Stop. You take one more step, I will shoot you.
Like, how
Just
can you
stop it,
fear
dude.
for your
It's not
life?
worth
This
it,
dude's
man.
moving at a snail's pace. They
Just
kill
drop it,
him
bud. Let's talk about
because he
this.
doesn't listen, bro. That's it.
What's your name, man?
They know that there's got to be a problem. At this point, you see that there's an issue
Yeah.
here.
What is your
like,
name?
He's not answering. He's not responding properly. There's something else going. Whether
Talk to me, bud.
he could be
out of here.
intoxicated, it
Talk
could be
to
some
me.
sort of
Mhm.
medical issue. Doesn't matter.
Talk to
But
me,
they-
man.
Just
What's your
completely
name?
unnecessary.
Isaac?
Nobody is in
You
danger
say your
here.
name's Isaac? Isaac. This doesn't have to be this way, bud. Just please, just drop it. Just drop it.
Okay, this is kind of keep it contained for now. This is what I'd like to do. I want either a beanbag shotgun or a 40 mil from a tactical vehicle, a 4-man element, wait
Yep.
for me to get there with the dog, and then we'll formulate a plan. Student about to turn to the, can you make your right turn?
Just drop it, bud. I'm 803. I'm out on him. I need units to come to my rear if they're gonna bring the shotgun. Me and Motion 22 are trying to talk to him.
No, you're issuing commands. You're not talking to him.
Look, the other officer has a car between him. He's not in any
And
immediate danger.
Is it some sort of fucking
Drop it,
macho
bud.
thing? They don't want to be seen as retreating if this guy
I don't
walks so
wanna
late
shoot
towards
you
him.
today.
I think that's part of
It's
it
not
for sure.
worth it.
You know, so let the guy walk.
I'm gonna
If you
shoot
could,
you. You come
Look
one
how
more
slow.
step, you're dead.
Kill him. And they only show one shot.
yeah,
Is there one other video?
there we go. It's a macho thing. I don't want to be seen as retreating. I can't retreat until we can figure this out. It's nothing imminent. There's no imminent danger. The pigs are murderous fucking pigs.
Yeah,
Come on,
completely
man.
unnecessary
They also-
murder.
That's
Just put
this
it
They
is
also
down.
have two of them there, so one of them could hold a gun while the other guy hit him with a taser.
Look, if you're
Which-
scared of this dude,
Which, on top of that, as I said in the first place, there was no reason for them to be there.
he didn't
He
raise
wasn't
his
doing
arms.
anything illegal.
Neither was Tashi from around there. There was no
And
reason
he's-
for them to chase and
What's
murder
the
him,
front
but they like to
Hey!
chase and murder.
He's close
slow.
enough to them they can distinguish what he has in his hand.
Bro.
They knew that wasn't a sword
completely unnecessary.
No, but everybody's got to get their kill.
because he held it up and he was
yeah.
putting his hat on again. And,
Listen,
you know,
now this officer here, this is his first kill.
I'm not sure. They don't even really. They
Yeah.
don't tell you that at
Well,
the
this
press.
is I'm not sure. So he could get his tattoo now after only 1 year on the force. He got his tattoo.
Yeah, not to
showing-
mention the paid vacation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, that should definitely be reviewed by this the citizen review board that we have out here, the one that has
that
no
rubber
teeth,
stamps. all over
Goddamn
shootings.
coward bastards.
which
And
they
it
aren't.
has no actual ability to make a decision because all they
No.
do is recommend stuff to the sheriff.
Yeah.
Who does whatever he wants.
And then
Yep.
they have no subpoena abilities. They have no. I mean, it's a joke. It's a sham.
Yeah. How many times have we seen?
I mean, let's
we've
say
gone through the process and we see that the process is
yeah,
ineffective
time and time again.
and phony.
Yeah. So let's say charges were brought and he didn't even get fired. He was allowed to resign. Well, then he'd go to another police department and then he would end up killing somebody else, like this fucking dude.
Correct.
You know, this was an
Does
LB.
this look familiar? This
Yeah.
guy's face.
Who was caught on video assaulting somebody and falsely arresting them and had no charges brought against him.
Yeah, so this is Nevada, nvcopblock.org. Definitely go over there, check out Kelly's article. Why don't you tell everybody what happened here, Kelly?
Well, I mean, it's been a little while, but people that have been in Vegas for a while know Derek Colling. He's a well-known officer. He's killed 3 people now, including the one in Wyoming. And there was one case in 2006, which it was an issue where they came out and they say that the guy they shot pulled out a gun. But that was before body cameras, and that was before people were really scrutinizing Metro. So who knows if that's even true? But you could say, okay, we'll say that one was maybe valid. But the second case, the one that got a lot of the attention, there was a 15-year-old kid who had bipolar disorder and he had manic depressive episodes, and he was having an issue where he wasn't taking his medication, and his mother called. And the thing is, it was one of those situations where she called for them to come and help him and basically take him to the hospital. The cops showed up and they have the video of it because they had a taser which had a video attached to it. And so there is a video of it, and basically what happened is he stood behind his mother and was holding a knife. Derek Colling showed up and basically it's one of those situations where as soon as he got out of the car, he walked over and shot him, and just shot the kid. And his mother had stated from the beginning, she's never changed her story at all. She's never even
wavered.
They pulled her away after they shot, and they didn't even like confirm to her that he was dead. They held her and like questioned her for 3.5 hours. And she never, the whole time she maintained that he was not trying to hurt her. He was basically cowering behind her and trying to protect himself out of fear from the police.
Now, this is the shooting here in Vegas, right?
Right.
Now, this newest one.
Yeah, so he wasn't even fired for that, though. He was, that was considered, that was real justified because they all were back then.
They all,
Right.
And they still are.
Mhm.
But what he was fired for is there's a videographer that does a lot of cop watching named Mitchell Crooks, who actually had done, he had a pretty well-known video in LA before that. And he was out filming a stop that Derek Colin was doing. And he was in his own front yard. And Derek Colin came over and demanded that he stop filming. And he said, no, I'm legally allowed to do so. Jeez. And Colin attacked him and on video beat him and then tried to kick the camera to destroy that video, but that didn't work and it actually got recovered. And falsely arrested him. I think the charge was obstruction. And eventually, it was 8 months later, he actually got fired because of that, after costing the taxpayers of Las Vegas $100,000 in a settlement. And so that's how he ended up in Wyoming. It's his actual hometown in Laramie, Wyoming, where he went and got hired. And the sheriff there, who's actually up for election today, which is probably part of the reason why they haven't officially announced that Derek Colin is the cop that did this.
Yeah, because this fucking dude never should have rehired this fucking murderer in the first place.
And
Correct.
it took about 3 years for people to find out about this, about his history with the Metro Police Department. But when they did, there was a lot of controversy about it, and he defended it, saying, oh, he was so good at the physical fitness test during the academy and all this stuff, because like his history of like beating people and killing people isn't relevant as long as he's in really good shape and he can shoot good, which that's the other thing is he was good at target practice. But so he stopped a man who also is mentally ill, same situation, schizophrenia related issues, and they haven't released any of the details, and as I said, the reason for that is because they don't want that to come out during the election.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is this happened on Sunday of this week, but the family released the information that it was Derek Colin. And what they say happened is he had stopped him for a traffic stop. The person that he was Robbie Ramirez, and is the guy's name, but he, as part of his mental illness, he avoids conflict. He basically runs if somebody confronts him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he did, is he was in his car and he drove home. And anybody that's been to Wyoming knows Wyoming is a tiny, tiny state. I mean, North Las Vegas.
Population-wise.
North Las Vegas has more people population-wise than the whole state of Wyoming does. So Laramie has 30,000 people. It's a small town. People know each other. And Derek Colin actually went to high school with the guy that he shot.
Oh, wow.
And they played together on a baseball team, and they were in some school choir together. So this isn't some guy that Derek Colin didn't know anything about and didn't know that the guy had mental issues.
Mm-hmm.
And was, should have been afraid of him. He's somebody he knew and knew his history. And instead of having some sort of other resolution of it, calling other cops to come out to help him deal with it, having somebody come and talk him down that's trained, he just shot him. And it's one of those things where it's not at all uncommon. In fact, it's kind of the thing. When cops get fired for misconduct, they just go to a different department.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like the cops get fired from one department, then they go to another department, and they end up shooting somebody.
Right. I think they classify that as serial killers, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
They become serial killers as they go from state to state, department to department. I don't know how they're not weeded out and why people accept them, but it's a horrifying thing.
Because it's that big thin blue line, and they're all brothers. you
Yep.
know, so they take
No
care
matter
of
how
each
many
other.
people they murder.
Yeah. But it's, I mean, like if all the cops you could find to hire, you couldn't find a guy who hasn't already killed 2 people and been fired for excessive abuse.
Yeah.
Right.
Excessive force against a citizen.
Yeah, it's just crazy. There needs to be, I've said this before, but there needs to be like a blacklist where if you've been fired or even if you retire, because a lot of the
There should
times.
be tracking.
Yeah, a lot of the times they, instead of getting fired, they resign or they retire so that they can collect their pensions and their unused, paid time off or whatever. Taxpayer funded, of course. And then they go and work somewhere else. So if you retire, resign, or get fired, you need to be blacklisted so that no other department can hire you in the nation. Because this happens way too often.
Well, I did an article, I think about 2 years ago in Wisconsin, where they did a study. They found out 1/3 of the police officers in Wisconsin had been fired from another department.
It's crazy. So we didn't do a show last week, so I've got a couple articles from last week still on here. Again, from the Free Thought Project. This is an unarmed man who was murdered by the police for jaywalking. And this video is just ridiculous.
What are you doing? What?
I forget where it is. It's the Pacific Northwest somewhere. I don't know if it's Washington or Oregon.
What are you doing? What are you doing, dude?
Just going to the restroom.
Yeah, he follows dude into the restroom over jaywalking.
See your fucking hands right now. Let me see your hands. What the fuck are you doing? Eating food. Shut the fuck up. You don't even talk to me like that. What are you doing? What is this place called? Talk with me or not. Want a cup? You're gonna get tased, you're gonna get on the ground. Get on the ground. Get on the ground. Do what you're God.
For what, bro? For what?
Get back and get on the ground.
Jaywalking. There's no crime too petty that an officer won't kill you
No, you're
over.
not. You want to bet? Do you want to bet? Do you have ID on you? What's your name? What's your name? Get back. Touch me again, see what fucking happens. Get back.
He's trying to leave the restroom.
Get on the ground now! Get on the ground now! Get on the ground now! 5125 tape. Get down on the ground again! Get on the ground! Turn around.
His camera falls off, but luckily you can still see. Pulls his gun. Just unloaded on dude. And his partner's right there. There's 2 of them. There's no need for that.
This is America.
There's at least 3 shots.
There you go, folks. Comply or die. Don't question. Put your head down. Don't assert your rights. Because you assert your rights, you die. If this doesn't teach you that,
Damn
Why
it.
did you do that?
Why did you do that, motherfucker?
You don't grab me, you don't do that!
that shit. Why did you make me angry? Why did you make me kill you?
Yeah.
Why did I, it's the classic abuser. Why did you make me?
Still trying to put cuffs on this jaywalker. Fucking unreal, dude.
Unarmed.
Unarmed. Followed him into the restroom. That shit just pisses me off. Anyways, this is another police brutality incident. Cops savagely beat innocent 16-year-old boy for filming them arrest his parents and then lie to cover it up. So his parents are getting arrested. He films them like everybody should do. Anytime you see the police, film them.
Comply or die. You assert your rights, you're going to get beaten and killed.
Multiple California cops were caught on video savagely beating a teen and then lying to cover it up. Now they're on trial.
Hey, which one is the good cop there? Which one isn't the bad apple?
That's a teen, 16 years old. Doesn't resist, doesn't swing. You just getting punched. Hit,
Oh, right there,
hit
right?
with the nightstick.
You see that? It's only a couple bad apples there. See the one good cop right there? He's just sitting there watching.
Yeah, the
See
good
him?
cop is the guy on the left.
Yep. You see him?
Or there's other two.
Oh, yeah, they come in and they're going to throw some kicks? Oh, wait. Here.
The good cop is the guy who's threatening the other filmer.
Yeah.
Tasers him.
Yep. And here's the good cop. I don't see a thing. There's no violence in my crew. We don't do anything. Right there. There we go.
And they all lied about what happened.
A barrel of bad apples spoils the one good cop.
So they're all on trial. Of course, we all know what's going to happen.
Well, remember, comply or die. There's a police war against the people.
Then this fucking dude, look, comes and stands in the way so he can't
Yeah,
film.
this is the good cop blocking the camera.
There he is. What do you need, sir?
I need you to get the fuck out of my way.
Exactly.
So he repositions himself in the way.
I guarantee you they train you for that in the academy.
Yeah.
I bet it is one of the new training tools now that they see it's effective.
They practice blocking that camera.
Yep.
'Cause they know how to do it.
Unbelievable. So, do we have any events coming up, guys, that you can think of?
We have Punk Rock Flea Market.
On the
It's
11th?
10th.
Oh, the 10th.
What is that, Friday or
Little Saturday, I think.
Saturday.
Is
At
it?
the Fremont Country Club, which is next to the Triple B. They're like connected to each other, and
Yes.
there's a bunch of different merchandisers and vendors and local groups that sell different clothing and
A lot of cool stuff,
art
jewelry.
and stuff. And then there's also some great bands playing that night.
Yep. Fremont Country Club, 601 Fremont Street, November 10th, Saturday night, 8 p.m. until whenever.
We'll be rocking all night long.
Yep, we're going to have a booth there.
We'll be there, yeah. Come and meet the crew from ACAB Radio. Come and say hi.
We might have a little bit of merchandise for you guys. What else? Anything else going on? Well, we got Food Not Bombs every Sunday. We usually do it 3 days a week, but it's just down to 1 day now that Circle Park is closed. Hopefully it should reopen.
In another 3 weeks. The first, they saying, of December, but
Until then, where's it being held?
there's a small park not too far down on Charleston and 16th Street, Mayfair.
Okay.
We go down there and we serve the folks there. We share out food and build community with them. Luckily, a lot of the people we know, and people know where to find us if they're hungry, and if they need clothing, because we've been have a lot of clothing that we've been able to give out now that the weather's changing. So long pants, long sleeve shirts, shoes, we have it all.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up here. We're a little over our time.
We bit.
Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back again next week with more police brutality news and viral stories and videos, because the police never stop.
Good night, guys.